On Africa 24 English, the African Union Journal is presented to you by Afreximbank.
Welcome to the African Union Journal, your weekly rendezvous on news around the African Union. This edition reviews the 39th African Union Summit, focusing on Africa's role in the G20 and UN Security Council reform, and highlights the continent's food and climate challenges. Faced with food and climate challenges, agriculture must boost its economic, environmental, and social performance to support the Sustainable Development Goals. Digital technologies are key to transforming precision agriculture into inclusive, locally integrated agroecology. A report by Sarah Ajay.
Facing population growth, climate shocks, and external food dependence, Africa must rethink its agricultural systems. Digital agriculture now appears as a strategic lever to strengthen food sovereignty and accelerate economic integration within the framework of the African Continental Free Trade Area.
Digital agriculture has become a strategic imperative for ensuring food security, boosting productivity, job creation, and building resilient agri-food systems. Building on this momentum, the African Union is organizing the first ever Digital Agriculture Conference under the theme Shaping Agricultural Policies for Africa's Future, Digital Innovation and Climate Smart Practices for Agri-Food Systems Transformation, which is a landmark event to accelerate the digital transformation of Africa's agriculture. The conference will focus on key issues. 1, showcasing digital solutions contributions to our agri-food systems.
In 2025, ECOWAP, the agricultural policy of ECOWAS, remained the guide for regional actions aligned with the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program (PDDAA) framework. It aimed for the sustainable transformation of agriculture, emphasizing climate resilience, food security, and regional trade. The ECOWAS Regional Agency for Agriculture and Food (RAF) strengthened its implementation. The Regional Food System Resilience Program, supported by the World Bank, was rolled out, targeting regional crisis management, productive capacity building, digitalization of agricultural services, and facilitation of cross-border trade.
It is my distinct honor to welcome you to the inaugural African Union Conference on Digital Agriculture, a landmark event that reflects Africa's determination to harness technology for agricultural transformation and sustainable development. This year's theme, and I quote, "Shaping Agricultural Policy for Africa's Future, Digital Innovations, Climate Smart Practices for Agri-Food Systems Transformation," end of quote, captures the essence of our mission.
By removing obstacles to agricultural development and supporting it with new investments, Africa's agricultural production could grow from $280 billion per year to $1 trillion by 2030, according to the African Development Bank. Investing in increased agricultural productivity, supporting infrastructure and climate-adapted farming systems with private sectors, investment throughout the food value chain can help make Africa a breadbasket for the world.
The use of digital technologies, mobile platforms, remote sensing, blockchain, data analytics, and many others is revolutionizing how we produce, how we manage, and how we market our agricultural products. Digital agriculture offers us a path to increase productivity, enhance resilience to climate change, and empower our farmers, and especially women and youth, by providing them with vital information, resources, and market access. Recognizing this potential, the African Union has taken important steps, including the adoption of the Digital Agricultural Strategy (DAS) in February 2024.
Digital agriculture is not merely a technological modernization, it represents a strategic tool for structural transformation. By enhancing productivity, market transparency, and regional connectivity, it can become a pillar of Africa's food sovereignty and a catalyst for economic integration within the framework of the African Continental Free Trade Area.
Nairobi, Kenya hosted a high-level conference on March 17 to 18, 2025 on financing smallholders farmers. Co-organized by the African Development Bank and PAFO, it gathered policymakers, investors, and experts to improve farm financing, drive agricultural innovation, and boost food security in Africa. Nana Kamsukam tells us more.
Faced with persistent challenges in African agricultural sector, limited access to inputs and financing, vulnerability to climate change and market instability, a high-level conference on financing smallholder farmers was held in Nairobi, Kenya on 17th and 18th March 2025. Organized by the AFDB and PAFO, it aimed to propose concrete solutions to support the 80% of smallholder farmers who produce the majority of the continent's food but control less than 5% of agricultural land.
Our partners like ZEPRI demonstrate how building insurance with credit solutions can reduce risk exposure and strengthen financial resilience for farmers and agri-SMEs. Banks such as Cooperative Bank of Orama are integrating blended finance, digital credit scoring, and concessional financing to make agricultural lending more visible at scale. When it comes to farmer aggregation and digital solutions, organizations like the Kenya National Farmers Federation play a crucial role in ensuring that smallholder farmers are not only connected to markets, but also integrated into structured financial ecosystems through digital platforms. As we engage today, I encourage our panelists and audience to reflect.
Smallholder farmers produce more than 70% of Africa's food but remain marginalized. Limited access to finance, costly inputs, lack of appropriate technical services, and inadequate infrastructure. Experts have identified obstacles: high perception of risks, unsuitable financial products, high transaction costs, and unfair value chains.
So the issue before us is larger than financing. To me, Honorable Minister, because it is good to address myself to the Minister of Agriculture in Kenya. The solution lies at putting the small-scale farmer at par with the large-scale farmer, with the commercial farmer, in terms of productivity. So the real game changer is how do we increase the productivity of the small-scale farmers? How do we increase? If large-scale farmers and commercial farmers are getting finance, we have not sat here to address their needs. They don't need to be addressed in a conference. Banks are financing them.
The conference brought together ministers, financial institutions, farmers, NGOs, and agri-food experts to identify concrete solutions. The interactive sessions focus on financial mechanisms adapted to agricultural cycles, strategic partnerships, and the strengthening of digital infrastructure. Experts also suggested specialized financial products, risk sharing to involve commercial banks, and targeted subsidies to encourage private investment.
On technology, partnering with a technology company, and looking at the solutions they have been providing to the needy community. The other thing is a partnership. Micro business and smallholding farmers needs collaborative approach rather than competitive approach. So we need to have a collaborative race to really bring the intended impact. What we have done with Michu Digital Lending, we have discussed with 5 banks in Ethiopia. We have shared our experience and the challenges we have passed through. And now 5 banks are already integrated to the system. If you see the Ethiopian population, we are over 150 million. If we see the category of the farmers, 1.2% are enterprise level, which are around 220,000 households. And 12% are 2.2%. 2.2 million farmers are at self-sufficient level, which are still viable when we see as a bank.
The public-private coordination platform aimed to establish inclusive and sustainable agricultural financing for Africa. The goal is to empower smallholder farmers, strengthen food security, and support rural development. By mobilizing resources, the conference lays the foundations for more resilient and productive agriculture to meet the continent's needs.
In Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, the 39th African Union Summit brought together African heads of state and government at the heart of discussions with Africa's place in the G20 and the reform of the UN Security Council, two strategic issues for strengthening the continent's voice on the international stage. More details in these reports.
Since 2016, the African Union has launched a broad reform program to strengthen its effectiveness and in Africa's peace and security architecture. Meeting in Addis Ababa on February 14 and 15, 2026, as part of the 39th African Union Summit, African leaders are taking stock of progress. Key items on the agenda include evaluating the AU's role within the G20 and the reform of the UN Security Council. The Peace and Security Council and the Regional Economic Communities are central to this framework, but the realities on the ground remain more complex.
The CWA has supported participating countries in implementing ambitious reforms, mobilizing investment, and strengthening dialogue between private investors and international partners. It has demonstrated pursued wide-ranging mobilization, strengthened public financial ministries to private partnerships.
In Sudan, in DRC, in Sahel, or in Mozambique, the AU plays a limited role, leaving external powers to take the lead. According to a senior official of the organization, the problem is not institutional but political. Member states provide insufficient support for African initiatives. The lack of cohesion hampers conflict prevention and paves the way for external actors to intervene. In Mali and Central African Republic, UN missions have stepped in, while coordination among the RECs remains weak, undermining collective initiatives.
So the IMF contribute to this effort through country-specific policy advice, capacity development, and support to reform as part of a fund-supported program that we have with some of the countries. We also contribute through analytical and policy work. So the compact countries have shown strong resilience, actually outperforming other African countries despite successive shocks and challenges such as elevated public debt for some of them.
To strengthen its influence, the AU should, according to experts, convince each state that supporting collective action is not an abstract ideal but a strategic investment in regional and continental stability. As the summit reviews the reform of the UN Security Council and the continent's role in the G20, this question of credibility remains at the heart of the discussions.
Si le compact a permis de mobiliser des financements extérieurs,
while the compact has helped mobilize external financing, it has also highlighted the weakness of domestic investment, which remains below 12% of GDP. One of the key lessons for Togo is therefore the establishment of fiscal and financial incentive mechanisms to boost local investment, particularly that of small and medium-sized enterprises and young entrepreneurs.
et des jeunes entrepreneurs.
The 39th AU Summit is expected to move toward adopting resolutions aimed at strengthening Africa's presence and influence in global institutions. Several heads of states have emphasized the need for a permanent seat for the continent.
On to our regional news, SADC concludes its assessment of the impact of the flood and reaffirmed its solidarity with Mozambique. ECOWAS and the African Development Bank extend their regional integration strategy until 2027. And finally, in the East African community, export growth improved external performance in the third quarter of 2025.
From January 24 to 31st, 2026, the Southern African Development Community (SADC) deployed its emergency response team to Mozambique following severe floods affecting 5 provinces. More than 700,000 people were impacted and 14 deaths recorded. The intervention, carried out in 2 phases, emergency response and recovery, represents the first regional activation of the humanitarian and emergency operation-centered mechanisms. Supported by the European Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations Directorate, the UN Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the UN Disaster Assessment and Coordination Center, and the World Food Programme, the mission strengthened national coordination and facilitated access to the Regional Relief Fund. From February 4 to 6, 2026 in Abuja, the Economic Committee of West African States ECOWAS Commission and the African Development Bank held consultation to extend the 2020-2025 Regional Integration Strategic Document until 2027. This decision follows a midterm review approved in September 2025. The revised strategy is structured around 2 pillars: regional infrastructure and resilience governance. Since 1988, the African Development Bank has supported regional integrations. Its current portfolio in West Africa exceeds $3 billion, spanning infrastructure, energy, agriculture, and governance. In the third quarter of 2025, trade within East African Community (EAC) jumped from 21.9% to $40.3 billion, driven by exports up to 32.3%, around $19.6 billion, and imports up to 13.3%, worth $20.6 billion, reducing the trade deficit to $1 billion compared with $3.4 billion in 2024. Intra-African trade accounted for 32.2%, thus $10.1 billion. Annual inflation reached 28.3% in September 2025, with peaks in South Sudan 179.4% and Burundi 34.1%. Broad money supply increased by 15%.
The United States has reactivated the African Growth and Opportunity Act for a 1-year period. This major trade initiative allows eligible African countries to export goods to the United States duty-free. Confirmed in February 2026, this extension aims to boost African exports, support industrial growth, and strengthen trade relations across the continent. More insight in these reports.
The United States has renewed the African Growth and Opportunity Act (AGOA) for 12 months, preserving duty-free access for thousands of African products. In 2024, U.S.-Africa trade reached $104.9 billion, with export totaling $32.4 billion and import reaching $39.6 billion. This has supported jobs, industrial growth, and export diversification across the continent. South Africa, a leading AGOA beneficiary, has welcomed the extension. According to President Cyril Ramaphosa, it provides certainty for African producers and exporters, particularly those looking to boost export and deepen participation in global value chains.
Africa is an important source of critical raw materials, but we do not want to be defined to simply being the producers of commodities. The great industrial opportunity lies instead in the transformation of the rocks that we mine and the metal that we produce into the sophisticated industrial and consumer goods that societies across the world need.
Dr. George Alumbi, president of the African Export-Import Bank (Afreximbank), highlights the Pan-African Bank's capacity-building programs, trade finance tools, and digital platforms like the Africa Trade Gateway are key to helping African banks and exporters seize AGOA opportunities. The platform, supported by over 80 banks, connects buyers and sellers, verifies counterparties, and promotes African products.
Nous estimons qu'ici, nous pourrions transformer plusieurs produits.
We believe that here we can transform several products, and from here we will be able to bring expertise to other African countries where there is a need for these expertise for transformation, which remains for us what we will have to do in the next 10 to 15 years. Speaking in Washington, United States Trade Representative Jamieson Greer reiterated that the one-year reauthorization of AGOA forms part of the U.S. strategy to strengthen economic ties with Africa. He emphasized the benefit of AGOA in promoting investment and economic growth across the continent, while highlighting that the one-year extension allows time for longer-term legislative discussions.
And part of what I've been discussing this whole time is that trade should be focused on national interests and that we shouldn't be bound to agreements that tie our hands.
Established in 2000, the African Growth and Opportunity Act has historically allowed eligible sub-Saharan African countries to export thousands of products, particularly textile, apparels, and agricultural goods, duty-free to the U.S. market. Over its lifetime, the program has supported billions of dollars worth of trade and contributed to job creation in key sectors across the continent. With preferential access preserved for another 1 year, policymakers see that African exporters will have the stability they need to plan market strategies, attract investment, diversify their exports, and foster broader economic growth.
From March 28 to April 3, 2026, the city of Tangier, Morocco, will host the 58th session of the Economic Commission for Africa on the theme Growth Through Innovation, Harnessing Data and Advanced Technologies for Africa's Economic Transformation. The event will be held in conjunction with the Conference of African Ministers of Finance, Planning, and Economic Development. From March 3 to 5, 2026, the city of Lagos, Nigeria, will host the Summit and Exhibition on Industrialization, Production, and Trade in West Africa. Supported by Nigeria's Ministry of Industry, Trade, and Investment, the event is a platform bringing together regional and international industry players to stimulate the industrialization process in West Africa. According to the organizers, West Africa, rich in natural resources and with a young and dynamic population, has all the assets to play an important role on the global economic stage. The 12th edition of the African Regional Forum on Sustainable Development is scheduled to take place in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, from April 28 to 30, 2026. The event is held annually to ensure integrated monitoring and review of the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the goals of the African Union's Agenda 2063, the Africa We Want. The 12th session of the forum will be held under the theme Reversing the Trend, Transformative and Coordinated Actions for the 2030 Agenda and Agenda 2063.
A new and powerful voice within the African Union, Ghanaian diplomat Amalum Amour has held the strategic post of Commissioner for Health and Humanitarian Affairs since February 2025. In a context of persistent health crisis, she intends to place the sovereignty and resilience of African health systems at the heart of the continental agenda.
Seasoned diplomat Amadouam Amour was elected Commissioner for Health, Humanitarian Affairs and Social Development in February 2025 for the 2025-2028 term. She takes the reins of a strategic portfolio. Her role takes in particular significance in a context marked by recurring health crises and pressing humanitarian challenges.
Health is the foundation of security, prosperity, and sovereignty. Without resilient systems, economic growth is unattainable. To invest in health is not optional. It is the most strategic political choice we can make. This meeting must therefore mark a shift from dialogue to action. It is our opportunity to speak with one voice in global health governance and to demand reforms that reflect the realities of our people.
A graduate from the University of Cape Coast in Ghana, Amadouam Amour went on to earn an MBA from the University of Canberra before joining the Ghanaian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the 1990s. She served in Washington, Canberra, and Geneva before being appointed Ghana's ambassador to Ethiopia and permanent representative to the African Union and the Economic Commission for Africa. The diplomat also oversaw the reopening of Ghana's High Commission in Australia and led several multilateral initiatives related to development and regional cooperation.
The African Union has long recognized viral hepatitis as a critical public health challenge and acted through the Africa Health Strategy 2016-2030. We have also launched the Triple Elimination Plan addressing HIV, hepatitis, and syphilis, which began in Uganda and is now being rolled out across the continent.
As the head of the Health and Humanitarian Affairs portfolio, Amatwa Mamo focuses on the resilience of health systems, continental coordination, and equitable access to care. Her work also aims to strengthen health governance and position Africa as a major player in global reforms in the sector.
Let us commit to clear and actionable steps to transform Africa and the Caribbean from perceived peripheries of the global health system into equal partners, innovators, and leaders. Together, we can turn shared challenges into shared opportunities. Together, we can deliver universal health coverage, achieve our continental and regional goals, and safeguard the dignity of future generations.
Through her leadership and strategic vision, Amatwa Mamo embodies a new generation of African leaders committed to greater health sovereignty. Her mandate is to make health and social protection sustainable pillars of stability and development for the continent.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for following this edition of the African Union Journal. Stay connected to Africa 24 for the best African news in streaming and replay on our website, africa24tv.com, on Play Store, on the My Africa 24 app, and across all our digital platforms.
On Africa 24 English, the African Union Journal is presented to you by Afrexim Bank.